says the Talmud. And Rabbi Munk puts it very strongly. He says, an expression of gratitude which is not preceded by the acceptance of the obligation to observe the divine law is blasphemy, which is a little bit on the strong side, I think. But the idea is that if you're saying thank you and you have not done what God has asked you to do, and you're saying thank you and etc., just doesn't quite stack up. So first you have the blessing of avodah, the temple service, and then you express your thanks. Now this word modim actually has three meanings. As you know, when we recite modim, we bow down. And the reason for that is because the first meaning of the word modim, we actually find in the Targum, the Aramaic translation, in the book of Samuel, the second book of Samuel, chapter 16, verse 4, where we find the Targum's translation of the word hishtachaveh, to bow down. He translates that as modim in Aramaic, so that saying thank you and bowing down appear to be one and the same. And that's the reason why when we say modim, we bow down, because of the Aramaic translation of the word modim, who gave us the insight that within the concept of saying thank you is to actually prostrate yourself, to humble yourself, so to speak. And that's the idea of bowing down. So that's the first meeting. The second meeting is on the word hoda'ah, which, as you know, is connected with the word Yehuda, which is connected with the idea of a Yehudi, of a Jew. Hoda'ah means acceptance, and acknowledgement. So it is the acceptance of all that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has done for us. And the third meaning in this prayer of Modim is plain and simply to say thank you for all the amazing and wonderful things which we have in our lives. And we'll look at some of those as they're explained in this beautiful prayer in the coming days. Just one more point I want to make to you, if there's still, if the minion is still there, and that is on the expression al chayenu hamasurim biyadecha, for our lives which have been placed in your hands, which are entrusted into your hand. One of the commentators, the Vudrams, wants to suggest that this is the idea of the way in which we entrust our souls to God at night when we go to sleep, and how they're returned to us again in the morning. However, it doesn't quite make grammatic sense, because it says hamasurim biyadecha al nishmotenu hapekudot lach, for our souls which have been entrusted lach, to you. The idea of entrusting a soul is normally not lecha, but b'cha, in you. As, for example, we'll say each night, biyadcha av kidruchi, into your hand, I entrust my soul. So this idea doesn't quite fit. There is another idea, however, which is drawn from a verse in Ezekiel, talking about those who have been appointed as over the gates of the house. And the word lifkod is to appoint. The very lovely idea that the Almighty gives us a soul and appoints that soul to take care of the body. Normally we think of it the other way around. When we talk about body and soul, we normally say body first and soul afterwards. And we think that so long as our body is going to be healthy, then our souls will be healthy as well. Exercise, eat well, etc., and that will be good for your neshama. This idea is exactly the opposite way around, that the soul inside of us has a duty to ensure that our bodies don't stray away from the things that it is intended to do in the service of God, and our neshamot are the driving forces in our lives.
Good morning, everyone, and Chodesh Tov. Good morning to everybody online. As you can see, I've defected to the other side today, and to join the minyan, I could not resist being here for the Rosh Chodesh and blowing the shofar for the first time in Elul. I want to come back to a thought which occurred to me as I was driving to shul this morning, and that is that of the 19 blessings that we recite in the Amidah, most people will probably have one which resonates with them. I don't want to say favorite, because that's the wrong kind of word when you're standing before God and communicating with Him, but one which will resonate, you'll feel more strongly than others. And I can imagine that throughout the ages, for this would have been the different blessings for people in different circumstances. So, it just occurred to me that there might have been times when Jews really struggling, in Russia and Eastern Europe, just to be able to get money together for Shabbat, Erev Shabbat today, and a heartfelt prayer, for Parnasa Barecha, Adonai Eloheinu, bless us, with material prosperity. There have been times, of course, when people have been racked with terrible illnesses, either personally or in their family, and all of a sudden, Rafa'enu Hashem suddenly becomes a terribly, terribly meaningful prayer and very heartfelt. And maybe there were times when holy Jews just longed and longed and longed to be able to see Jerusalem and Zion, Yerushalayim Recha B'Rachamim Tashuv, etc. And that's what led me to think that if there's any one blessing that we should be, when we come to it, our hearts should leap, and I should say, yes, this is something which I really, really feel. It should be the 18th blessing. Modim anachnu lach. I give thanks to you, O Lord. Well, we have an incredible, incredible amount in our generation to be thankful for. It's not in every generation, and it hasn't been for a very long time, that Jews have been able to live and practice their faith in an environment of complete freedom, when at one and the same time we've not only been allowed to practice our faith, but we've been welcomed into wider society, where we've been able to have positions of influence, positions where we can make a difference, positions where we've been accepted and we've been respected by people. A generation in which we're able to most times get on a plane and travel to Israel and go and sun ourselves in a hotel overlooking the Kotel. So many blessings, the blessings of prosperity. Not everybody is hugely wealthy, but very few of us struggle to put food on the table each day. And all of these are incredible, incredible blessings. And therefore, one of the fundamental principles of Judaism, which was enunciated right at the very outset in relation to Adam, when he turned and pointed a finger at Eve and said it's her fault, that the sages immediately jumped on him and said, this is a person who denies the blessings that have been given to him, and this is considered to be a serious omission in Jewish life, and one doesn't recognize the goodness and the blessings, and to be able to say thank you for them. So Modim Anachnu Lach is a prayer in which we say thank you to God for all the things in our lives. Some of them are actually enunciated in the prayer, and some of them we should simply just feel in our heart or think about in the good fortune of our lives. I wanted to just point out again, as I did earlier, one phrase over here which attracted the attention of the author of a commentary on the Siddur called Iyun Tefillah, Rabbi Yaakov Tzvi Mecklenburg. And he says, Val Hanisim, as we say in the prayer over here, and I'll just find it again in my Siddur, which we translate over here as for your miracles that are with us daily. Now, we normally consider miracles to be something which is a little bit out of the ordinary, something which really is so out of the ordinary that you can't help but notice it. And that's the word a miracle, things which are amazing, absolutely amazing, and sometimes completely beyond nature. And Mecklenburg points out over here that in the book of Samuel, this word nes, the same word nes, actually comes in a very different context. And there we have a phrase to the effect that I have not become, Lord Nisiti, I have not become accustomed to a particular thing. And he says, therefore, the word nes doesn't only mean a revealed miracle. It means the kinds of miracles which happen every day in our lives, to which we become so accustomed that we no longer take any notice of them and don't even think of them as miracles. The miracle of life. The fact that you wake up in the morning and you breathe. We do say, by the way, when we wake up, Modeh Ani Lefanecha, the very first words we say is, thank you, God, for restoring me to life. But there's so many things in our lives, and particularly in our homes, in our relationships, in the good fortune of the circumstances of our lives, that we simply take for granted every day. The fact that we have a roof over our heads, we don't have to sleep out on the street, which many people today do have to. we take that for granted. The fact that we put on clothes when it's cold, we've got warm clothes to put on, and when it's hot, we have summer clothes. We have a wardrobe of different kinds of clothes for every occasion. If you're into sport, you've got a wardrobe full of clothes specifically for that sport. I mean, it's just amazing, the quality of our lives, and most of it is simply taken for granted. The fact that we have running water, which is not the case in many parts of Africa. The fact that you just flick a switch and electricity comes on. The fact that we have transport. The fact that there is a system working behind us all the time to keep, garbage collectors and systems which hundreds of people working simply to make our lives comfortable on a day-to-day basis. The fact that somehow amazingly the cornflakes arrives on our table from who knows where. Who was involved in the technology and in the labors and the work to bring that box of cornflakes to our table? There's so much in our lives. And our sages in the temple, the priests would say this modim anachnu lach as part of their prayer, but I think it takes on a very, very special meaning in our lives as well. And by the way, this is the only prayer where in the repetition of the Amidah, we do not rely upon the Chazan to pray on our behalf, but we have to have our own prayer, which is inserted, called the Rabbi's Modim. And the question is why? And the answer to that question, I'm afraid, we're going to have to wait until Sunday to find out.
I'm going to return now to our description of the Amidah, and we were up to Modim Anachnu Lach. So the whole purpose of the repetition of the Amidah is that an appointed person, an emissary on behalf of the community, stands up and recites the entire Amidah on our behalf, and that was done for one of two reasons. Either because people didn't have Sidurim themselves and therefore couldn't read the prayers or say the prayers, or couldn't say them accurately or remember them exactly. So one person who had a Siddur would stand up and read the prayers on behalf of everyone else. And second of all, because it's possible that a person, when in their own private prayers, didn't quite get it right the first time, didn't quite get it exactly where they wanted to. Maybe their prayers weren't heard, and possibly the person has been appointed as a leader, is a righteous, holy person. And when they pray and say all these blessings on our behalves, we get a second shot at it, and it's belt and braces. So it's we should listen very carefully to that person, because they are actually saying the things that we said, and we're getting another opportunity for our prayers to be heard through that person. So you can have an emissary who is able to pray on our behalf, and that is because all of our prayers consist in the main of requests or of pleas to the Almighty, and we are very happy for someone to make that request or that plea on our behalf. There's only one exception to this, and that is in the blessing Modim, where you'll know that when the Chazan comes to Modim in repetition of the Amidah, we have to recite silently a little prayer which sits at the side of the main prayer in the Siddur. And this little prayer is called the Modim de Rabbanan, the Rabbi's Modim. The reason why this is the exception is because this prayer is about saying thank you. And you can't have someone else say thank you on your behalf. You can't appoint an emissary to say thank you for you. Thank you is something that a person has to say themselves, and they have to be able to say it directly to God. But sometimes we don't know exactly what to say thank you for or how to say thank you. So there's a discussion in the Talmud in Sota 40a, in which a number of rabbis indicated what their preference would be in terms of saying thank you. And the Gemara lists them. So Rav said, we say thank you to God for the ability to be able to say thank you. And that's really very profound. Shmuel said, God of all flesh, and that's why I'm saying thank you to you, because you're the God of all flesh. Rabbi Simai said, our creator, the creator of all things in the beginning, for which we want to say thanks to you. The Nahardians, there was a great big, very famous yeshiva in Nahardia, which was in Babylon, which is where the Talmud was developed, said in the name of Rabbi Simai Blessings and thanksgivings to your great name, because you have kept us alive and preserved us, and for that reason we should say thanks to you. Rabbi Bar Yaakov concluded and said, and so may you continue to keep us alive and be gracious unto us, and gather us together and assemble our exiles to your holy courts to observe your statutes and to do your will with a perfect heart. And for that reason we give thanks to you. And Rav Papa said, consequently, so then this question arises in the Gemara. Each one of these sages has got a very nice thank you. Which one shall we include in our Siddur as a guide to the person who's praying, who's not quite sure exactly what they should be saying thank you for? So Rav Papa comes along and says, I like them all. I think we should say all of them. And therefore, if you look very carefully at the Modim prayer that we say silently, it contains each one of these prayers of these individual rabbis. Now, it looks like they're entirely random, but in fact, there is a pattern to them, and there's a profound pattern to them, and it's that pattern that, please God, we'll look at tomorrow. We're talking about the Modim, which is recited silently, and it's called the Modim de Rabbanan. The reason why it's called the Rabbi's Modim is because, as the Talmud and Sota tells us, a number of different rabbis had views about what should be recited, and Rav Papa at the end said they should all be recited. So this is a compilation of all of the different views. However, there is an order. Of course, when it comes to saying thank you, you can say it whichever way you want. But if you need a little bit of help from the sages in terms of what one should be saying thank you for and how to say thank you, here it is laid out in this Modim de Rabbanan. And if you look at the words over here, you see that actually it takes you through a number of different steps. The first one is, we give thanks to you, O Lord our God and God of our ancestors, God of all flesh, Elohei kol basar, Yotzreinu Yotzei Bereshit, the one who formed us and formed the whole universe. So the sense over here is the first giving thanks is to the ineffable God who's beyond, so in this universe, who drives the universe, who creates the universe, but who's still very, very distant from us. And then we say beyond that even that part of God which is revealed to us, which is called his shame, his name, even that we give thanks for. So the next part over here is, blessings and thanks are due to your great and holy name. What are we giving thanks to God for? This is the God who created the universe, but what's it got to do with me? And the answer is plainly and simply, this is a God, Shechiyatanu v'kiyamtanu. This is the God who gives me life and who sustains me. Here in these phrases, you hear, of course, the blessing which is recited on all significant occasions when we come to a season of happiness, of celebration. Shechiyanu v'kiyamanu v'giyanu lizman hazeh, who's brought us to this time. Here we are putting in every single day in our prayers the same expression, Shechiyatanu v'kiyamtanu, who has vivified us, given us life, and sustained us. What's the difference between these two phrases? That's for another time. And then the next thing is, okay, so you have given us life. What do you want next? And the answer is, I'd like, please God, to be able to recite these same prayers next year this time. I'd like to continue to live, if you don't mind, please. So the next part of the phrase is, Kein techayenu tikyamnenu, and therefore may you continue to give us life and to sustain us. That's what we're asking for. I want to be alive tomorrow as well. For what reason? Why would one to be alive? What's the purpose of life? And so the blessing continues. In order that you gather our exiles to your holy courts, so we can keep your decrees, to do your will and to serve you with a perfect heart. If that is not the goal of life, then what is it that we're living for? So immediately this blessing gives us Jewish purpose and Jewish focus. And we conclude, to be able to serve you with a perfect heart. That is the goal of our lives. For that we give thanks for the opportunity to be able to do that. For all of this, we give thanks to you. Baruch Kel Hadaot. Blessed are you, O Lord, the God to whom thanksgiving is due. A beautiful blessing that takes us through a number of different steps. So we come finally now to the 19th and the last of the blessings. And there is a paragraph after that, which we'll discuss as well. But in terms of the structure of the 19 blessings, this is the last blessing. So in Leviticus chapter 9, we learn that when Aaron completed the sacrificial service, he raised his hands and he blessed the assembled people. So his descendants, the priests in all the subsequent generations, would therefore recite the blessing, the priestly blessing, after each day, after having performed the sacrifices in the temple. Since we have completed our prayers which are in place of the sacrifice, it is appropriate, therefore, that at this point in the service, we have a priestly blessing. Now, as you know, in the diaspora, we don't actually have the priestly blessing. Priests don't go up. It's been adopted almost universally throughout the diaspora that the Kohanim only recite the blessing on holy days, because then the festival spirit of the day creates the atmosphere of serenity and harmony and of simcha and of joy that is a precondition for all blessings. And we are unable to attain that in the diaspora. As you may know, in Israel, they have duchenin. The priests actually bless the people every day because Israel has a higher state of sanctity and holiness, and one can reach this kind of state that one needs to be in order for the blessing to be effective in Israel on a daily basis, and one doesn't have to wait for the festivals to come round. But the priests, of course, would end the blessing, V'yasem lecha shalom, and may Lord give you peace. And that is why, therefore, the last blessing that we have in the Amidah is the blessing for peace. It follows on directly from the blessing of the Kohanim who have blessed us for peace. And there's a lot to speak about in relation to peace, but just for today, I quote you from the Medrash that Rabbi Mani of Sha'av and Rabbi Yeshua of Sichem said in the name of Rabbi Levi, "Great is peace, for all blessings and all the good and comforting things that the Holy One, blessed be He, brings to Israel always conclude with the blessing of peace." And so we find, for example, in Ma'ariv, at the end of the paragraphs of the Shema, Poresh Alehem Sukat Shalom, I shall spread over you the tabernacle of peace. At the end of the Amidah, we end with peace. The priestly blessing ends with peace. Peace is always that blessing which we bring at the end, because it's the blessing that contains all of the others. From tomorrow, please God, if my internet permits, we'll begin to look at it in greater detail. Now, as we're working through the Amidah, and we've come to the final blessing, the 19th blessing of peace, here is something which was written by Rabbi Yonatan Ebershitz. He was, of course, the 18th century sage who was the rabbi of the three communities, very famously. And he writes this about the prayer for peace. He says, "There should be a prayer for peace, since nothing brings greater blessing than peace. This is the most desirable bond, the complete uniting together of the people of Israel. And now when one prays for peace, he should pray that there should be no dissension in Israel, no jealousy, hatred, or rivalry, but that all should love one another, be banded together, and be completely and utterly united in love, brotherhood, and friendship. That all Israel should be of one spirit and have in mind to fulfill the precept of V'ahavta l'recha kamocha, you shall love your neighbor as yourself, which encompasses the entire Torah. And this too should be the objective of the prayer, which is this Amidah, which is the epitome of all prayer. One should pray to be entirely free of the trait of anger, that he should be humble towards all and in a state of peace. For where there is anger, there is no peace." Well, those are heady words, and it is a little bit idealistic and halavai that one would ever be able to achieve that which he has suggested over here. Nevertheless, this is hinted at actually much more succinctly in the prayer itself, because if you see the wording of the Sim Shalom prayer, we have the phrase Barchenu Avinu, bless us our Father, Kulanu Ke'echad, all of us as one. And one famous interpretation of this phrase is that the blessing from the Almighty will only come to us when we are as one. When we are Kulanu Ke'echad, that is when Barchenu Avinu. The one is dependent upon the other. authors of the Amidah, the sages in the time of Rabbi Gamliel, managed to capture all of those words of Rabbi Eberschutz and put it into 4 simple little words, but they're very powerful ones nevertheless. So Sim Shalom appears to be one single flowing prayer, but in reality it is actually 2 separate requests, and they are very different one from the other. The first one is an appeal to God. Sim Shalom, bring peace and goodness and blessing and grace and kindness and mercy upon us and upon all of Israel, which is a lovely sentiment. That's what we're asking HaKadosh Baruch Hu to bring into the world, and he can do that. But the second part is actually, in a sense, more important. It is that we pray to God that he should assist us, that we should be able to do the same to our friends and to people in the world. So the second part says that through the power of his intimate relationship with us, could he give us the koach, the possibility, the power and the ability to be able to spread in the world Torah Chayim, his Torah of life, and be able to spread to others loving kindness and to be charitable, to be able to bring blessing into the world, to be able to be merciful, to be able to give a sense of chayut, of life, of vivaciousness, and of course to bring about peace. All of this is not things which God is directly doing. That's the first part of the blessing. These are things that we're asking him to assist us to be able to do, that we should have the koach to do it. And in order for us to be able to do this, we need one really important component, and that is that we need to be ba'or panecha, to be intimately connected with the inwardness of God's energy, so that we have the power to be able to do these things in ourselves, in our own lives, in our own souls, to others in the world. And very often people simply think about Sim Shalom, the last of these prayers, as something which we're appealing to God, bring peace into the world, without realizing that actually it is a call to us to be able to take the energy of God and to do it ourselves. The kind of tzorah which follows after that. Why? The answer is actually very strange and something of a paradox. The Talmud says, do not let your prayers become a mere act of routine, but let them be a petition of mercy and supplication. What they meant by this was that because we have words which have been formulated for us by the sages, there's a danger that we simply recite those words on a mechanical basis every day and never get to say the things which we really should be saying from our own heart. So in order to be able to overcome that problem, once these prayers were fixed, the various sages of the Talmud began to develop their own prayers that they would add at the end. It was their own private requests, things which were important for them. And the recommendation was that everybody would do exactly the same thing, that we'd finish the formal prayer and then we'd stand for a few minutes and say the things which simply came from our hearts in some unregulated way, unmechanical way, but it would be absolutely genuine. And that was a very good idea. The Talmud then proceeds to describe the prayers of 11 of the sages. And then one of those prayers becomes attached to the end of our Amidah. And it becomes as fixed and as formulated as all the rest of the Amidah. So you've got this strange situation in which the whole intention was that there should be something that was free flow, that would come from our hearts. And yet we adopted one of the prayers of one of the rabbis, the prayer of one of the rabbis, and made it as fixed as the rest of the Amidah. So it defeated the entire object of the exercise. Nevertheless, for one reason or another, that prayer was considered to be so important, having selected it from the 10 others, that the sages who set the Shulchan Aruch, who set the laws for us in the Shulchan Aruch, decided that this should be incorporated across the board of all cultures, Sfardim, Ashkenazim, etc., that universally this would be the way in which we would actually end the Amidah. I want to spend the next couple of days actually looking at, from the Talmud, looking at the 11 prayers, and you'll see which one then becomes the one that is selected, because some of them are very fascinating. What was it that individual sages were asking for that was coming from their own hearts? So the first one is the prayer of Rabbi Elazar, and he ended his prayer as follows: "May it be your will, Lord our God, to cause to dwell in our lot love and brotherhood, peace and friendship, and may you make our borders rich in disciples and cause us to ultimately succeed, so that we'd have a good end and hope for the end of days. And may you set our portion in the Garden of Eden. And may you establish for us a good companion and a good inclination in your world. And may we rise early and find the aspiration of our hearts to fear your name, and may the satisfaction of our souls come before you. In other words, may you hear our prayers, and may we have spiritual contentment in this world for the best." So a whole bundle of different kinds of sentiments over here. The first one, once again, praying so powerfully for brotherhood and for peace. Then this idea that the world, our borders should be filled with Torah learning, with disciples, people who engaged in Torah. And then this hope that we'll actually succeed in what we're doing, that we'll live with a sense of hope for the future, which is so very important. And that there is a happy end for us. There's some reward for us, which he describes as Gan Eden, the Garden of Eden. And then this next strange point, one which we'll come back to again in one of the other prayers, about being able to have good companions, being able to be with people in the world who are good for us and we're good for them. And that we should have a good inclination, a good yetzer, that our yetzer hara should not get the better of us, that we should be good people. And that we should continue to have the enthusiasm to be able to get up every morning with a sense of excitement about our Jewishness and about coming to pray before the Almighty, that we shouldn't be just the sense of, oh no, here we are, this is the first thing I've got to do, it's a drag, it's another whole sense of obligation, it's responsibility, the sense of freshness that has to be there all the time. And the last thing that he asks for is, may you actually be satisfied with what we have to offer you. So this is a very lovely prayer. Nevertheless, it didn't make the cut. So we're going to have to look at the next one. So what we discovered yesterday was that although the Amidah ends with the blessing of peace, because the sages were very keen that our prayers should not be mechanical and become a matter of rote, so that we simply read a formulistic arrangement of prayers that have been written by other people, in this instance, the sages of the Great Assembly. They wanted us to have something which was a lot more personal, fluid, inspirational, something which came from our own heart. And therefore, they suggested that at the end of the Amidah, one should append one's own prayer. The Talmud then goes on to describe the prayers of 11 of our great sages, the things which they actually said at the end of the Amidah, and these were recorded for us. At the end of all of this, one of these prayers is selected to actually form another fixed prayer at the end of our Amidah. So that the entire intention that we should have fluidity and that we should be simply allow our own instinct to express whatever we wanted to say was kind of like swept away. And here we have yet another formulistic prayer which has been laid down and everybody reads it. That's the way it's enshrined in the Shulchan Aruch. So it's a bit of a strange situation. Nevertheless, it's a beautiful prayer. And before we actually come to it and understand why the sages felt it was so important to include this particular offering, we've been going through, starting with yesterday, some of the other prayers that are mentioned in the Talmud Brachot on 16b. So yesterday we saw the prayer of Rabbi Elazar. And today we're going to look at the prayer of Rabbi Yochanan, who used to conclude his prayers, says the Gemara, as follows: "May it be your will, Lord our God, that you look upon our shame and behold our plight, In other words, this is about the fact that we find ourselves as Jews. This is post-destruction of the temple, the absence of Shekhinah. The Jewish people are not valued in the world. We're downtrodden. And there's a heartfelt cry over here that HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Almighty, should actually look at this and that he should take note of it. How does he take note of it? And he continues as follows. He said, beautiful words over here, that you should look upon our embarrassment and our shame, and you should see our plight, the word ra, the terrible, evil situation that we find ourselves in. And then the word titlabesh means to clothe, lavush. May you clothe yourself in mercy. The titkaseh b'uzecha, and may you cover yourself. Kisui means to cover. May you cover yourself in strength. The titatef b'chasidutcha, and may you, titatef is like hitatef b'tzitzit, to wrap yourself, and may you wrap yourself in might. The titazeh b'chaninutcha, and may you therefore strengthen yourself in your grace, and may your attribute of goodness and humility come before you. So he develops an imagery over here in this prayer, which is actually almost anthropomorphic. The idea of like a person puts on a garment, that you enclothe yourself, that you put on different kinds of clothes, and you know what happens when you get dressed up. You feel different. You slump around the house, as we all have during coronavirus, and look, you can see me now, and I'm wearing a shirt, but maybe I'm just wearing underpants. You've got no idea. Yeah? Maybe I'm barefooted. We never show the bottom half of ourselves, do we? Yeah? And until by mistake you stand up to get something from your bookshelf, and everybody sees that you're only half dressed. You know what happens when you put on? You want to get really nice, go out, and going out smartly. You're getting dressed up in your best clothes for some big do. You just feel different about yourself. Suddenly you feel smart, So clothes make a difference to a person. The way clothes we wear are actually a reflection of our mood. And here in this imagery over here, this idea that the Almighty, just like when we a man puts on a talit, or a woman puts on a shawl, and they enclothe themselves, and it brings out a different kind of emotion. So he turns to HaKadosh Baruch Hu and says, look, we are in this awful situation over here. We beg of you, put on a different set of clothes. All these expressions of titlabesh, b'tachaseh, lehitatef, are all expressions of enclothing. And when that happens, a new sense of chen, of grace to us, of rachamim, etc. And that will change the situation, and may your attribute. So then your sense of grace and of goodness and humility will come to the fore, and that's what will change. So a very beautiful prayer, just in the way in which it has been expressed. Okay, so Rabbi Zera used to conclude his prayers with the following very short prayer. He used to say, may it be your will, Lord our God, that we not sin or shame ourselves, and that we don't disgrace ourselves before our forefathers. In other words, in the sense that our actions should not disgrace the actions of our forefathers. It's actually a very powerful prayer. That one has to live up to certain expectations. Of course, our forefathers are no longer alive, but we have a sense that they stood for certain kinds of things, and we should not let them down. I mean, imagine, looking forward, to God willing, to children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren down the generations. How disappointed one would be if one's descendants were not to follow in the path of Jewish life. So looking backwards then, one carries within oneself a great sense of responsibility to be able to live up to what would have been the hopes and expectations of our ancestors. And in that respect, he says, I pray that we don't shame ourselves or disgrace ourselves before our forefathers. In its own way, it's very, very powerful, but clearly in these days, not strong enough to prevent people from drifting away. Rabbi Chia prayed and he said the following: "May it be your will, Lord our God, that your Torah should be our vocation, Shetahei Toratcha u'munatenu, and may our heart not become faint or our eyes dim." Mean to say that we should continue to have our enthusiasm, and be able to see freshness in the world. Dimmed eyes, I don't think just means that we begin to lose our sight. I think it means in a more abstract sense. Becoming faint doesn't mean that we just lose our koach. It means instead that we continue to be energized, that even as we continue to study, never become tired of it, that it remains fresh and energetic. And possibly it also means that we should continue to, is praying that we have our faculties. Just one more over here, and this is Rav. This will do for today. Listen to this carefully and tell me where you've heard it before. Rav at the end of his davening would say that would offer each day the following prayer. May be your will, Lord our God, that you grant us a long life. Chaim shel shalom, a life of peace. Chaim shel tova, a life of goodness. Chaim shel bracha, a life of blessing. Chaim shel parnasa, a life of sustenance. Chaim shel chilutz atzamot, a life of freedom of movement from place to place. We are not tied to any one place. Chaim sheyesh behem yirat chet, a life in which there is the fear and the dread of sin. Chaim she'en behem busha uchlima, a life in which they're without shame and disgrace. Chaim shel oshevesh v'chavod, a life of wealth and honor. Chaim she'teheh banu ahavat Torah v'yirat shemayim, a life in which we have the love of Torah and the reverence for heaven. Chaim she'tmaleh lanu et mishalot libenu l'tova, a life in which you fulfill all the desires of our heart for good. So here you have a prayer which didn't quite get the first prize. It wasn't included as the prayer to be recited every day after our davening. But it was considered to be so important and so special that it did have, at least in Ashkenazi liturgy, a very special place. You no doubt recognize where this prayer belongs. This is exactly the words that we recite in Birkat when we bless the new moon for Rosh Chodesh once a month. Which I say Ashkenazi because Sephardim actually don't say it at all. But it was included in Ashkenazi liturgy. Okay, good morning everyone. So yesterday we learned about the prayer of Rav, the prayer with which he ended the Amidah. After he had completed the Amidah, he recited the prayer which has now been incorporated into the paragraph which we read when we announce the new month on Rosh Chodesh, on the Shabbat before Rosh Chodesh. Today we learned about the prayer of Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi. Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi was, exactly as his name suggests, he was the prince, he was the leader of the Jewish people. He was very close to the Roman authorities. He was greatly respected by them. He had political dealings. He was the editor. He was the person who composed the Mishnah. He was living in the land of Israel. And he has a fascinating prayer that he used to say at the end of his davening. Once again, it's found its way into our own prayers, not again as the final prayer after reciting the Midah. Didn't make that particular cut, but you'll recognize it when I read it in Hebrew, and then I shall read in English. It says the prayer as follows. Yehi ratzon lefanecha Hashem Elokeinu v'Elokei Avotenu shetatzilenu me'azei panim u'me'azut panim me'adam ra u'me'pega ra me'yetzer hara me'chaver ra me'shachen ra me'satan hamashchit me'din kasher me'bal din kasher bein shehu ben brit bein she'ena ben brit. Reading in English. So after his prayer, Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi would say the following: May it be your will, O God and God of our fathers, that you save us from the arrogant and from arrogance in general, from a bad man, from a bad mishap, from an evil instinct, from a bad companion, from a bad neighbor, from the destructive Satan, from a harsh trial and a harsh opponent, whether he is a member of the covenant, a Jew, or whether he is not a member of the covenant. So, you can immediately tell where this prayer comes in. This is a prayer which we recite verbatim in our pre-Shachrit prayers, those beautiful prayers, which which in the Siddur, just before we start the communal prayers of Shabbat. The Gemara then goes on to make a statement about this over here and says Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi would recite this prayer every day, despite the fact that he had royal officers who stood over to guard him. It was a bit like, the chief rabbi. He had police protection. And so, he was elevated above all the other people. So this would have automatically conferred upon him a certain kind of superiority and possibly leading to arrogance, etc. So the Gemara says that Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi would recite this prayer every day, despite the fact that royal officers stood watch over him for his protection, and nevertheless, he would pray to avoid conflict or hindrance resulting from arrogance. So despite his huge position, there was an enormous sense of humility, and he understood that all the machloket, all of the kind of stuff which happens in communities are really undermining, and he prayed that he should not get caught up in all of that on a daily basis, as we all do at the end of the Amidah. And Rav Safra was an interesting man. He was a businessman, a merchant. He lived in Babylon, used to travel to Israel, and whenever he traveled, he used to meet out and seek out sages, engage them in halachic conversation. And he never had a yeshiva, he never had disciples, but he is considered to be one of the great sages, and he was really known for his extreme honesty and for distancing himself from all forms of dishonesty. And in a sense, his travels and his engagement and his involvement in the wider world would have helped to formulate the particular prayer that he recited at the end of his Amidah. And he said as follows: after his prayer, Rav Safra would say the following: "May it be your will, Lord our God, that you shetasim shalom, that you establish peace, b'pamilia shel ma'ala, b'pamilia shel ma'ata." The word pamilia is a very interesting one because it is from the Latin word, you can hear it, pamilia, family, pamilia. It's the origins of the word family, pamilia. And a family means a group of people who are close. So the family in heaven and the family down here below. Who's the family in heaven? The angels. Who's the family down here below? It is the sages. May there be peace amongst the angels in heaven. May there be peace. Why do you have to have peace amongst the angels in heaven? Because on the one side you've got Michael, who is the angel of kindness, and the other side you've got Gavriel, who is the angel of Gevurah. Chesed and Gevurah clash one with the other. So you have to be able to oseh shalom b'imramav. You have to make peace in the high places. You have to bring these two opposing forces together. Similarly, amongst the sages, there are so many opinions that it leads to arguments and to engagements, etc. So his prayer was, in all of this great discourse which goes on in the world above, the various energies in the world above, contradictory energies, and the contradictory views and opinions which arise down below. Praise to God, may you, standing above all of that, bring peace into the world. And so to the heavenly entourage, to the earthly entourage, among the disciples engaged in the study of the Torah, whether they engaged in its study for its own sake or not for its own sake. And by the way, and all of those engaged in Torah not for their own sake, may they ultimately come to actually study it for its own sake. That was his prayer. So what he's really getting at over here is that he sees an enormous amount of tension and energy in the world, and he sees an enormous amount of machloket and discussion. He wants the Almighty to establish balance. He wants that kind of security, that sort of that balance that has to always be there between opposing forces in the universe. It's a big theme, yin and yang in other religions, that there's always a kind of a point at which it's all held together beautifully, and the tensions can coexist one with the other without it creating a tipping point in one direction or the other. And that was what he was looking for, which is actually a very profound idea. Okay, so Rabbi Alexandri, may it be your will, Lord our God, that you station us in a lighted corner and not in a darkened room, and don't let our hearts become faint, and our eyes dim. You know, the different circumstances in which a person can be born, you have no choice over it. You can be born in a dark place, in a dark land. I don't mean physically dark, a backward place where there's little opportunity. There's no opportunity for education to advance. You know, you could be in a little village somewhere in the middle of Africa, you know, with violence all around you and lawlessness, etc. That's a very dark place. You know, it's a privilege to have been brought up in a place of light, where there's the opportunity to actually, you know, express oneself and to fulfill one's potential. And as a consequence, if you are in a light place, then there can be continued enthusiasm. There's continued courage in your heart to want to persist, to continue. Your eyes don't become dim in the sense that there's always interest, and that there's, you know, you are engaged with the world around you. That's what he prayed for, and that is a matter that is for the Almighty. You know, which very often we have no choice in this whatsoever. Other people said that this was in fact the prayer of Rabbi Hamnuna, not Rabbi Alexandri, and that what Rabbi Alexandri would pray was the following: Master of the universe, it is revealed and known before you that our will, really, our inner will, is to perform your will. So what prevents us? If deep inside of us we're built in such a way that we actually want to become close to God, and this, by the way, is a fundamental theological difference between Judaism and Christianity, in which in the latter there is a belief that a person is born evil and you only become good if you accept the Savior, whereas we have a very strong belief that a person is built inside of us, that from the very outset, that we are built with a desire and a will to be connected with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and that there are just external forces, nothing that is fundamental, nothing which is systemic, that prevents us. What are the things, he says, then that have prevented us from being able to connect with HaKadosh Baruch Hu? He says, and there are two. This is what he said in his prayers. He said, the yeast in the dough and the subjugation of the kingdoms, and may it be your will that you deliver us from their hands, so that we may return to perform the edicts of your will with a perfect heart. The yeast that is in the dough. It's a lovely expression. It's chometz. What does chometz stand for? It represents arrogance, yes, one's own ego. So two things prevent us from coming close to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. One is my sense of self and my own self-importance, and that gets in the way of God. And the second is what he calls subjugation of kingdoms. That can either mean, in its most brutal sense, oppression and difficult times that is imposed upon us by the ruling government, which interferes with our ability to be able to make a living, to be able to practice our Judaism in the most extreme sense, etc. So that is one of the things which prevents us. Or it could simply mean, in more benign times, such as the times in which we live, the subjugation to the kingdom means that we are completely given over and swallowed up by and subjugated to the culture that is produced around us, the secular culture. And so that's two. So you've got an internal force and an external force. Internal is my own Yetzer Hara, the yeast that's in the dough. And the external force is the environment in which I live. Those are the two things, he says, that actually are the impediments against my inner desire to connect with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So we've been looking at the various private tefillot that some of the sages would recite when they had concluded the Amidah and wanted to add their own prayer. We've seen that two of them so far have actually found their way into the liturgy. Rav's prayer is actually incorporated into the paragraph, the beginning of Mevarach HaChodesh, when we pray for the announce the new moon on Shabbat, the Shabbat before Rosh Chodesh. And Rav's prayer, Rav Yehuda Nassi's prayer about praying to God that we avoid bad people and bad situations has been incorporated into our morning prayers in the Shachrit prayers, the ones which we recite at home before the minyan starts. Today we have another prayer which has also found its way into the liturgy. And I wonder if, as I read it in English, whether anybody will know where this prayer is to be found. After his prayer, Rava said the following: my God, before I was created, I was worthless. And now that I've been created, it is as if I had not been created. In other words, I am just as significant. I am dust to life, all the more so I'm dust in life, all the more so in my death. I am before you as a vessel filled with shame and humiliation, and therefore made be a will, Lord our God, that I will sin no more, and that those transgressions that I've committed be cleansed in your abundant mercy. But may this cleansing not be by means of suffering and serious illness, but rather in a manner that I'll be able to easily endure. Anybody know where this prayer is to be found in our liturgy? עד שלא נצאתי אני כדאי ועכשיו שנצאתי כאילו לא נצאתי אף אני בחיי קל וחומר במיתתי הרי אני לפניך ככלים מלא בושה וכלימה. Any guesses? Okay, let me help you. Because this was the confession of Rav Hamnuna Zuti on Yom Kippur. And it is actually in our Ne'ilah prayer on Yom Kippur. A very timely piece of learning over here. Well, we need to look at why one would want to depict oneself in such negative terms. Surely that is not going to do very much for one's self-esteem, but we'll talk about that a little bit
privately after the Amidah, none of which have been fortunate enough to be incorporated into our Amidah, although 3 of them have found places in other parts of our liturgy. Today we come to the last of these prayers, and this was a prayer which was recited by Mar, the son of Ravina. Mar is Mr., the son of Ravina, who would conclude his prayer. When he concluded his Amidah, he recited the following: Elokai, my God, netzol shani meira, v'sefatai medaber mirma. O God, my tongue from evil and my lips from speaking deceit. Nafshi ke'afal kol tiyeh, may my soul be like dust before all. Tach libi b'toratecha, open my heart to your Torah, the mitzvotecha, and to your commandments, to Roch Nashi, and in regard to your commandments. May my soul pursue them. V'tatzileni mipega ra, miyetzera, ishara al, mikol ra'ot ha'midrashot labo ba'olam. And save me from a bad mishap, from all evil inclination, from a bad woman, from all evils that suddenly come upon the world. And may the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart find favor before you, Lord, my rock and my redeemer. If anybody has not recognized those words, then one has to ask, what have you been done with all of these words? Because these, of course, are the words which we recite after we have concluded the last blessing of the Amidah. So Mar, the son of Ravina, wins the prize, and it is his prayer that then becomes incorporated according to the Shulchan Aruch across all liturgies, Ashkenaz, Sfard, throughout the world. This is the prayer that made the cut. This is the one that we say. The question, therefore, is why this one when all the other prayers were very beautiful, some beautiful sentiments, and this is the one that was actually included. So I suggest it might be because this is a prayer about speaking Lashon Hara. When we stood up to begin the Amidah, we said the words, Hashem, God, Sefatai Tiftach, open my lips, and my mouth shall speak your praise. So we've just been through a process of beautiful, beautiful words in which we have used our mouths, our lips, and our capacity for speech to be able to praise the Almighty. No sooner do we walk away from our prayers, we turn to the person next to us and we say to us, the chazan today was rubbish. You've taken everything you've just done and you've rubbished it. So the power of speech, the importance of guarding speech is the essential message that has to be hit upon immediately we finish the Amidah. And I think that's the reason why this particular prayer is the one which came in. There's more to talk about, but that's for tomorrow. So there is something very odd about the last paragraph of the Amidah that I've simply never noticed before because I haven't paid any attention to it. What we learned yesterday was that the words of the last paragraph are in fact
part of the prayer of, not the whole, but part of the prayer of Mar, the son of Ravina, in his private prayer. And what he prays for over here is that he asks for that one should be humble, that one humility. He asks for self-control, that we should be able to be silent in the face of slander and people who attack us. We should be as humble as dust in our intercourse with our fellow men. And on the other hand, we should be alert to the study of the Torah, patach libi b'toratecha, and diligent in the pursuit of mitzvot. Over mitzvotecha tirdof nafshi, let my soul chase after mitzvot. All of that is absolutely fine. That sits nicely. That's the part of the prayer of Mar Ravina. But then we go on to some words which are not part of his prayer, and which, when you look at them carefully, appear to be a complete and total non sequitur. Aseh leman shemecha, do it for the sake of your name. Aseh leman yimenecha, do it for the sake of your right hand. Aseh leman kedushatecha, do it for the sake of your holiness. Aseh leman toratecha, do it for the sake of your Torah. Leman yechaltzun yidedecha, in order that your beloved ones may be delivered. Hoshia mincha v'anenu, that would say with your right hand and answer me. And then another phrase, may the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart find favor before you, Lord, my rock and redeemer. Now, so first of all, this phrase over here, Seleman, Shemecha, etc., is not part of Mar Ravina's prayer. So it's suddenly appended over here. And when you ask yourself the question, when we say do it for the sake of your right hand, etc., what are we asking God to do? To do what on behalf of his right hand? Does this follow one from the requests of Mar Ravina? Are we saying over here, we've asked God for humility, we've asked God that we should be like dust in our discourse, humble in our discourse with other people, etc., and God should do that for the sake of his right hand, for his sake of his name, etc., which doesn't make any sense. Why should God be doing that in order for us to be humble? So I was suddenly confronted with the realization that these phrases over here, say lema'an, etc., has got nothing to do with the words which precede them. What does it mean? What are we asking God to do? So the Rabbi Eli Munk makes a very interesting suggestion over here, which goes to the very heart of why we are praying. Are we praying for our own blessings? And after all, we've been asking God for lots of things which we want. So it sounds as if the prayer is for our own sake. Are we possibly praying for the sake of nationhood? That it should be, that all these things should be, because we ask for the nation to come together, kibbutz galiut, we ask for Mashiach to come. All of that is very good for the nation of Israel. Who are we praying for? Why are we praying? So suggests Rabbi Eli Munk that with this phrase over here, we discover a whole new dimension to our prayers. We're not praying for our own blessings. We're not praying, yes, of course, we're asking for things for ourselves, but the real purpose of asking for those things is not just for our benefit. And the real purpose of praying is not just for the sake of Israel. Instead, what we say is the Seleman Shemecha. We pray in order that God himself should be revealed for God's own purpose, not for our purpose. Yemenecha means your power, for your revelation. Seleman Shemecha. So he says over here, we at the very end of the tefillah, comprising all of our demands and requests, we pray so that the divine name appear again in the full brightness of its glory. The right hand of God symbolizes his redeeming power. And that's a sudden realization for me that actually I thought I was praying just for myself and for Israel. I'm actually praying that God himself should get something out of it, so to speak. I'm praying for the revelation of God in the world, because that is what he intended. And that puts a different perspective on the whole of our prayer. And by the way, this would then accord with the source of this phrase over here. Where does it come from? We don't find it in any of the prophets, etc. So where does it suddenly arrive from? So there is an ancient source in the Agadah of Shmuel, one of the very ancient Gadadot, that says whoever repeats these 4 statements regularly will have the merit of being received into the presence of the Shekhinah. And that makes sense, because what we're praying for over here is actually for God to reveal himself in his full Shekhinah. That's what Aseh L'Ma'an is all about. But by the way, the original 4 prayers which are mentioned, the requests in the Agadah, are not quite the same as ours. We say in our prayers over here, for the sake of your name, for the sake of your right hand, for the sake of your holiness, for the sake of your Torah. And in the Agadah, it is do it for the sake of your right hand, same as us. Do it for the sake of your name, which is the same as us. Then do it for the sake of your righteous Mashiach. And finally, do it for your sake, not for ours. So in other words, it couldn't be more direct in that original prayer. For some reason or another, it's shifted and changed the way it comes down to us in our prayer. But we say very clearly over there, we are praying because we want you to reveal your Mashiach, and we want you to do it because this is what you have wanted in your universe. So there's an element of altruism over here in our prayer. It takes it completely out of our own personal context, even though you might have thought that everything you were praying for was indeed just for you and for the nation of Israel. Not entirely so. There's another dimension as well. So still looking at the very last paragraph of the Amidah, where we spoke yesterday about a Seleman Shemecha, Seleman Yimenecha, do it for the sake of your name, do it for the sake of your right hand, do it for the sake of your holiness, do it for the sake of your Torah. And then a phrase, Lama'an yechatsun yididecha hoshia yemincha va'aneni, which is translated in English as that your beloved ones may be delivered, save with your right hand and answer me. And in other versions, it reads slightly differently, Leman yechatsun yididecha, Lord of the universe, redeem them for the sake of thy beloved ones. Question over here is, who are the Yedidecha that we're speaking about? The word Yedid means beloved. It happens, by the way, to have been one of the names of King Solomon. Happens to be one of the names of one of our children. But a Yedid is a dearly beloved. So do this, save or redeem on behalf of your beloved. Well, you might think that in a cursory reading of this prayer, that this is referring to us, the ones ourselves who are actually praying. But apparently that's not so. Apparently the Yedidecha that is being referred to over here are none other than God's beloved, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And so at the end of our prayers, when after we've said, God, do it for your own sake, we then add as well, and also, by the way, do it for the sake of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, that they should see down the generations the fulfillment of the promises that you made to them in the path that they started generationally, and that we are following. And if we are not good enough to be able to merit it in their merit, then we fall back on Yimenecha, on your right hand, your strength, do it for your own sake. And then there's this final phrase, Yihil ratzon emrefi v'hegyon libe lefanecha Adonai tzuri v'goali, a phrase which appears in lots of different places, and we translate it as, may the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart find favor before you, Lord, my rock and redeemer. Where does this come from, this phrase? The answer is, it comes from Psalms, and that's what leads the sages in the Talmud to ask a very nice question. Surely it would have been better had we recited this little prayer, that may the words that I'm speaking and the meditation of my heart be acceptable before you, O Lord God. Wouldn't it be better if we actually said that before we started to daven, rather than after we finished? I'm about to pray to you. I hope that what I'm going to say is going to be acceptable towards you and that you'll hear me. That's the obvious way to start our prayers. So the Talmud asks the question, why then do we place this at the end of our prayers rather than at the beginning? And the answer is because, believe it or not, King David wrote this line at the end of the 18th prayer, the 18th Psalm in the book of Psalms. 18 Psalms, 18 blessings. The last line of the 18th Psalm is Yil Ratzon Emrefi V'Hegion Libi Lefanecha. And that's why this comes in the end. If you want to check on my words and go and have a quick look at the book of Psalms, you'll discover, by the way, that actually this verse is not the last verse. This verse is not the last verse of the 18th Psalm. It happens to be the last verse of the 19th Psalm, which creates a bit of a problem, doesn't it? But never mind. The sages in the Talmud solved the problem by explaining that actually our 19th Psalm is in fact our 18th Psalm, because Psalm 1 and Psalm 2, which we have divided into two Psalms, is in fact one Psalm. And as a consequence, we're one Psalm out throughout the rest of the book, according to the way it was actually composed by King David. So in fact, it is at the end of the 18th Psalm. But
we have 19 brachas in the Shemona.
Exactly, but we have 19 blessings. So divine providence has stepped in to ensure that this actually comes in at the end of the 19th blessing rather than the end of the 18th blessing. Isn't that nice and neat? And just think about the phrase for a moment. Yes.
Can I remember once you gave I'm not sure if it was a sermon on a Shabbat or on a weekday, and you mentioned this verse, and you said that we're often very distracted, even as much as we are trying to concentrate during the Shemona Esrei on the words that we're saying. Sometimes thoughts come in the head, and therefore, when you get to this verse, if you say it aloud, you something like it sort of redeems your meditation. Is that? Do you remember saying that? I don't know if you remember saying that.
It's a terrible situation when people remember things that I've said in the past, because it just doesn't allow me to say them again. But that's actually not what I wanted to say today. What I did want to say was this idea of Hegion Libi, which Jonathan Sachs translates as the meditation of my heart, my inner heart. May the words which I've spoken and the thoughts of my inner heart be acceptable before you. Now, I think there's something very deep over here. The words which we've spoken are just words. Most times, and I wanted to say this last night, Chochem B'Laila, after the session last night about our daily prayers, I sat and thought about all the things which I really had wanted to say, which I didn't want to say. But the thing I wanted to say last night, which I want to say now again, is that actually prayer is very difficult. It's very, very difficult to have real kavanah, real feeling and intention when you pray. Because after all, you're standing up reciting words to an unseen God. It's very hard to bring out one's real feelings in your heart. But if I were to ask you, what are the things that deep down in your heart you really, really, really care about? You would tell me, it's about important things to you, your children, your grandchildren, your life, your family, things. None of these have been properly expressed in the course of the words that were spoken in our prayer, because we can't access those feelings very easily. They're too deep, and they only emerge in times of challenge, of crisis, when we're faced with the realization of a critical moment, and suddenly all the real deepest feelings that are in our heart come pouring out, and we suddenly realize the things which are important to us in our lives. But on a daily basis, they're too deeply buried. And even though we've spoken these words and prayed for our health and prayed for our well-being and prayed that they have not really touched our hearts. We haven't accessed the deepest recesses of our hearts in our prayer. And therefore, in a very beautiful way, we acknowledge this at the very end of the Amidah. And we say to Almighty, you know, my thoughts were all over the place during this davening. I said the words, but my head was miles away. I mean, I was thinking about lots of other things. So I actually never managed to get a complete consistency and flow from my deepest heart to my mouth. It's like my heart and my lips belong to two different people. So therefore, what I'm asking you, God, is may the words which I've spoken be acceptable before you. But because you are Almighty God and you understand the depths of people's hearts and you can read deep down inside of us, I ask you that all of those things which I've actually not been able to articulate with deep feeling during the course of this prayer, the meditations of my heart, the things which are swirling around deep down inside me, all of my deepest hopes and aspirations for me and for my family, may I ask of you that you should access those, hear them, and accept them as part of my prayer as well. And in a sense, that's a very, very moving way to conclude our Amidah. That's really the last word. As a matter of fact, the sages say that this phrase is the one with which we conclude the Amidah. That is why in the Sephardi rite, we actually say it twice. We say it immediately after Hamavarech Hamois Rabba Shalom, that blessing, before we even start in the Kainet Sor. We say it. And then we say it again at the end of this paragraph. But Ashkenazim kept it only once with the very end of this additional paragraph, which has been added to our prayers. And this becomes the concluding prayer of this magnificent and beautiful thing which we call today the Amidah, and which has taken us quite a number of days and weeks in order to try and explicate. Morning, everyone. So the very end now of the Amidah is Oseh Shalom B'Mramav, Hu Yaseh Shalom Aleinu V'al Kol Yisrael V'Imru Amen. We always end with a blessing for peace. And by the way, after that we say the words Hi Ratzon L'Fanecha Hashem Elokeinu V'Lekevetenu She'baneh Beit HaMikdash B'Mhera V'Menu. May you speedily rebuild the Beit HaMikdash. And the reason why we recite this last part of it here is obvious. And that is because the entire prayer has been was established in place of the sacrifices. And therefore, as we conclude the prayer, it is appropriate for us to come back and to say, and can we pray that the actual sacrifices for which this prayer is, after all, just a replacement, should be reinstituted. But let's come back to Oseh Shalom. So actually, when you think about it, it's quite hard. It's quite a hard phrase to understand. Oseh Shalom B'Mramav. May he who makes peace in high places. What sort of peace is required in high places? Why is it that only the God who makes peace in high places is the one who's going to be able to make peace in this world? And does he make peace in this world? Or do we have to make peace in this world? Surely peace lies in our hands if there is conflict of one form or another. So it's actually quite a hard phrase to understand. Oseh Shalom B'Mramav, the one who makes peace in high places. The universe is a very complex place. It is, as any complex machine or entity, it has lots and lots of moving parts, so to speak. And they are inevitably forces and energies that are in conflict, one with the other. We talk in conceptual terms of the chesed, on the one hand, the attribute of giving and of kindness, of flow. We talk about the attribute of gvura, of restraint, of holding back. Those are two completely opposite forces. They, in many respects, are unable to coexist because they are so very different. So there are forces tugging backwards and forwards throughout the universe that have a contradictory nature. And if they spin out of control and they lose their equilibrium, then chaos will ensue. We know, for example, that even if the sun or the constellations were to move out of their orbit by even just a few degrees, it would bring complete absence of life to the whole universe. So there is an incredible balance, fine balance, which is held in place all the time in order to keep this great, big, huge universe ticking along on the basis on which it goes, and to continue to provide us with warmth and light and oxygen and all the things that we need in order to be able to preserve life. What is the force that holds these energies, these contradictory, conflicting energies, powerful energies? What holds them together? The word shalom doesn't just mean peace, it means shalem as well. By the way, I'm sure you've heard the story. The reason why Jews have the same word for hello and goodbye, shalom, is because half the time we don't know whether they're coming or going. But the word shalom means not just peace, but it means also completeness or wholeness. So when we ask the Almighty, or say shalom b'mramav, we ask him to hold this whole big bang shooting works together in a way of complete and total. Okay. So I just want to come back to this concept of Oseh Shalom Bimramav. There are several ways in which one can resolve conflict. Yes. The parties themselves who are in conflict can argue it out between themselves, but the problem is that people become entrenched in their position and they believe with complete, total conviction that their position is right and the other person is wrong. So very often that doesn't work. You can go to a mediator, and a mediator can try and help the parties to resolve by each one compromising a little bit, but in the end, nobody wants to compromise, and each side is going to blame the mediator for being biased to the other side. You can, of course, get a ruling of some kind or another. You can go to an arbitrator, or you can go to court, but then there's going to be one winner and there's going to be one loser. None of those are going to work in terms of keeping the universe together. The conflicting forces that are inherent in the whole of the universe. So there's one other way in which conflict is resolved. When the conflicting forces find themselves faced with in the presence of an overwhelming, bigger and more powerful force, all of their differences simply melt away. They become insignificant in the presence of this greater, bigger light. And that is what we mean when we say, Oseh Shalom Bimramav, that the Almighty's presence in the universe is so powerful that the conflicting forces have no conflict between them any longer. And that is why we talk about that the one who makes shalom in the high places should make peace in our world, because what we're really saying in that phrase is that we too should be able to resolve our conflicts in the presence of the Almighty. In other words, as we recognize this greater, bigger force in the world, our own conflicts, petty conflicts, small conflicts, insignificant conflicts, big for us, but in contrast, in the presence of the bigger story, the presence of God filling the universe, they are insignificant. So Oseh Shalom Bimramav, the one who has this power to be able to produce peace in the upper world, is the same power that produces peace in this world. And by the way, I found yesterday the answer to a mystery to which I've searched for an answer for a long time. On Rosh Hashanah and throughout the 10 days of penitence, up until Yom Kippur, we changed the phrase from Oseh Shalom to Oseh HaShalom. He who makes the peace or the peace. Why? What peace changes? Is there another kind of peace during the Aseret Yemei Teshuvah? So yesterday I did search on the internet and I found an answer. According to Rabbi Yitzhak Luria, the Arizal, the great Kabbalist, this is because the word Oseh and the word Hashalom each have the numerical value of 381, which is the name of the angel Safriel. Safriel is the angel whose responsibility it is to record those deserving in the book of life. And therefore, by invoking the angel's name, we express our hope during this time that we will be included in the book of life in the coming year. How do you like that? It's all about. And with that, I'm afraid we have completed the Amidah, and I've got no idea what we're going to speak about.